The Israel Defense Forces have advanced to Phase 3 of their offensive in Gaza. Rear Admiral Daniel Hagar, spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces, shared details about the ground operation in Gaza. In recent hours, ground forces have carried out operations in the city, intensifying pressure on Hamas's main stronghold, Gaza. During airstrikes and operations, the Israel Defense Forces eliminated several Hamas field commanders, significantly diminishing their ability to counterattack. Sadly, an Israeli soldier lost his life in yesterday's attacks, causing great sadness among the ranks. In response, soldiers carried out heavy attacks in the northern Gaza Strip overnight. These attacks inflicted severe damage on Hamas's infrastructure, both above and below ground. Hamas field commanders, sheltered in tunnels, are believed to have been hit. The magnitude of the attacks caused a major impact on Hamas's infrastructure, both above and below ground. Hamas described the attacks as intensive shelling, claiming the deaths of more than 200 people. However, the Hamas group's Ministry of Health figures have not been verified and do not discriminate between civilians and combatants. The Israel Defense Forces reported eliminating more than a dozen Hamas leaders, including battalion and brigade-level commanders, since the start of the conflict. This loss has disrupted the terrorist group's operations. In addition, they highlighted the capture of a Hamas stronghold, including observation posts, training areas, and underground tunnels. During the capture of the area, a large number of Hamas operatives and field commanders were reported killed in other clashes. These casualties have significantly undermined Hamas's decision-making structure. Israeli attacks have left the streets of Gaza in ruins as soldiers search for militant compounds. The harshness of the war has intensified to the point that the inhabitants of Gaza feel like they are living hell. The death toll in Gaza during the last month exceeds that recorded in 20 months of the Russian-Ukrainian war, with more than 12,000 lives lost. In parallel, the army revealed that its fighter jets have hit more than 450 Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip in the last day, including tunnels, military bases, observation posts, and anti-tank missile sites. An airstrike killed Jamal Musa, head of Hamas Special Operations, as well as the commander of Hamas al-Bala Air Battalion and other leaders of the Central Camps Brigade, who were involved in sending terrorists from the Hamas forces of Hamas's elite Nukba to Israel during the October 7 attack. These casualties deeply motivated the Israeli soldiers. The Israeli armed forces reported that, apart from airstrikes, the Navy carried out actions against Hamas targets, such as command centers, in addition to using anti-tank guided missiles at other strategic sites such as launching positions and surveillance posts. During the nighttime bombardment, a total communications blackout was experienced in Gaza, this being the third interruption since the beginning of Israel's ground incursion into that region. However, by yesterday afternoon, communication began to be gradually re-established in the area. The Israeli armed forces anticipate that the ground operation will continue for several months to fulfill the objective of dismantling Hamas, seeking to minimize losses for both its forces and the inhabitants of Gaza. During clashes in northern Gaza MCH, a 22-year-old member of the 9th Battalion of the 400th C, an armored brigade, lost his life. It is estimated that around 800 Palestinian civilians have escaped to the south of Gaza City and other northern areas following repeated requests for evacuation by Israel. Despite this, hundreds of thousands remain in the north, including those who left and later returned, citing severe shortages of shelter and other needs. Israeli aerial bombardments have been recorded as occasionally hitting towns such as Rafah and Khan Yunis in the south. These sites are considered by Israel to be havens for militants. According to the United Nations, approximately 1.5 million people in Gaza, representing 70% of the population, have left their homes. Many of them have taken refuge in educational institutions or medical centers to protect themselves from airstrikes after opening a 4-hour humanitarian corridor to move Palestinians from northern to southern Gaza. The army has released images showing Gaza residents moving along the Saladin Highway. The Israeli armed forces have stressed that they continue their efforts to facilitate the transfer of people from the north of the Gaza Strip to the south. In response, the Israeli military reiterated its long-standing request for the population to move to the south, where the actions of the Israeli armed forces are more restricted. Israel has repeatedly accused Hamas of using the population as human shields around its operations centers, and of hindering the evacuation of Palestinians from northern Gaza. Health officials in Gaza, under Hamas control, reported yesterday that more than 10,000 people, including minors, have died during the fighting. However, Israel is wary of the figures provided by the military group. Israel maintains that the figures published by Hamas include militant casualties. Likewise, Israel claims that its offensive in Gaza is aimed at destroying Hamas infrastructure and has promised to wipe out the entire armed group. The Israel Defense Forces have reported that they are attacking all areas under the influence of Hamas in order to minimize civilian losses. In parallel, the army has stated that it is coordinating with Jordan to transport essential medical services and supplies to a field hospital located in the Gaza Strip. Major General Yaron Finkelman, of the Southern Command of the Israel Defense Forces, offered a detailed assessment of the situation. Subsequently, Finkelman announced the incursion of ground forces into the Gaza Strip. The Israel Defense Forces also reported on the assessment carried out with the head of the Combat Engineer Corps, Brigadier General Ido Mizrahi, and other officials on the issue of tunnels used by Hamas. In a media interview the previous day, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that Israel will assume overall responsibility for security in Gaza for an undetermined period after the end of the conflict. Netanyahu added that Gaza should be led by those who do not follow the path set by Hamas. It is essential for our security. I believe that for an indefinite period of time, Israel will take control of general security due to the events we have witnessed. I will not allow a general ceasefire until all hostages are released by Hamas, although I am willing to consider short-term tactical pauses, brief moments of calm here and there. We have been through similar situations in the past. We will review the conditions for the entry of goods, humanitarian supplies, or the release of individual hostages, but I do not see a ceasefire viable general. Netanyahu also referenced the role of Iran and Hezbollah in the conflict, warning them against further involvement. In his words, I think they understand that if they decide to get involved in a meaningful way, the response will be very strong, and I hope they don't make that mistake. Netanyahu, as is evident, has no intention of ceasing his actions until all risk elements in Gaza are eliminated. The behavior of the Gaza population at the end of the conflict and in the face of Netanyahu's intentions to influence them is an aspect that remains to be revealed. We appreciate your attention and follow-up.